The expensive steak on my heavy porcelain plate was still sizzling audibly when my entire professional world abruptly fell apart. It was a perfect medium-rare cut, sitting on a beautifully crafted dish at an incredibly overpriced steakhouse in the heart of downtown Seattle. I had my heavy silver fork raised halfway to my mouth when Gavin Thorne suddenly stood up from his chair. Gavin, at exactly 38 years of age, was the newly appointed vice president of operations at Zenith Logistics. He was exactly the kind of profoundly arrogant corporate operator who constantly wore excessively tight, tailored suits and deliberately spoke in a loud, performative tone designed to dominate every room he entered. He confidently raised his crystal glass, looking around the exceptionally long dining table with a smug expression. We had just successfully closed the absolute biggest commercial logistics contract of the entire fiscal quarter, a massive national shipping deal with a highly prominent agricultural supplier. Everyone sitting around the extensive table was smiling brightly, laughing enthusiastically, and clinking their expensive glasses in celebration. "We absolutely did it," Gavin announced proudly, his booming voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "The entire dedicated team has pushed incredibly hard to make this monumental achievement happen." "Well, at least most of the team has pushed hard." He paused dramatically, a remarkably slow and deeply calculated grin spreading across his perfectly groomed face. "But as we inevitably move forward into this highly competitive market, we have to bravely face some incredibly hard truths. Sometimes, unfortunately, dead weight significantly slows down the entire operational machine. If you truly want a heavy freight train to move significantly faster, you simply have to ruthlessly cut the heavy, useless cars." The joyful laughter around the table instantly died, rapidly replaced by an overwhelmingly uneasy and profoundly suffocating silence. Then Gavin slowly turned his cold, calculating gaze directly onto me. "Julian Brooks," he said with venomous clarity, "is no longer associated with Zenith Logistics, effective immediately." The suffocating silence that immediately followed his cruel statement was impossibly heavy. I sat completely frozen in my seat, my silver fork suspended awkwardly in the empty air. I had dedicated 18 long, grueling years of my professional life to Zenith Logistics. I was 49 years old, and I had personally designed the entire complex routing architecture that actually made this massive, lucrative contract mathematically possible in the first place. My deeply complex code was the literal beating heart and vital engine of this entire logistics company. Yet here I was, being ruthlessly discarded like a broken, obsolete piece of office equipment right in front of the highly important clients we had just managed to win over. I slowly looked down the length of the silent table. Clara Jensen, my incredibly talented lead developer, quickly looked away, her face flushing with deep, visible embarrassment and quiet anger. Jared Vance, the dedicated head of quality assurance, deliberately kept his eyes glued firmly to his half-empty water glass, completely avoiding my gaze. Even the young, eager intern I had personally spent 3 exhausting months mentoring simply stared intently down at his trembling hands. The wealthy clients themselves looked deeply uncomfortable and visibly shocked by the profound lack of professionalism. "Let us confidently toast to rapid acceleration and absolutely not to unnecessary friction," Gavin finished smoothly, completely ignoring the tension. I slowly set my silver fork down on the table, and it made a remarkably loud, sharp clack that echoed in the quiet room. I carefully stood up, deliberately keeping my back perfectly straight and my expression completely unreadable. I did not say a single desperate word in my defense. I did not even bother to look at Gavin's smug face. I simply turned on my heel and began walking slowly and deliberately toward the brightly lit exit of the restaurant. As I stepped quietly past the immediately adjacent leather dining booth, a distinguished older man with neat silver hair and an incredibly sharp, tailored navy suit unexpectedly caught my eye. He was dining completely alone in the shadows. As I passed his table, he quickly reached into his expensive jacket pocket, deliberately pulled out a heavy, textured paper business card, and smoothly slid it across the polished wooden partition separating our tables. "Dead weight absolutely does not successfully build highly complex routing systems like yours," the older man said in a remarkably quiet, intensely serious voice. "My private office, 9 in the morning. Sharp." I slowly looked down at the heavy card. It elegantly read Elias Croft, founder and chairman, Meridian Vanguard Holdings. I did not immediately know exactly who this mysterious man was, but the sheer physical weight of the card felt incredibly real and deeply substantial in my hand. I quietly slipped the thick card into my pocket, nodded exactly once in silent acknowledgement, and walked steadily out into the freezing, rain-swept Seattle night. I spent the entire endlessly long night sitting quietly on the very edge of my mattress in the dark. My smartphone absolutely did not stop buzzing and illuminating the dark room. Endless text messages poured in rapidly from various former colleagues. Most of them were incredibly fake, obviously written by nervous people who were simply smelling blood in the water and trying to distance themselves. An old manager who had sat directly next to me for 5 long years texted a completely hollow message, saying it was a tough break and offering meaningless coffee. Another overly ambitious junior manager wrote a deeply insulting cliché about closing doors and opening windows. I profoundly knew they absolutely did not actually care about my sudden humiliating termination. They were simply immensely relieved that the corporate axe had not fallen on their own necks. Half of them had probably nodded in silent, cowardly agreement when Gavin loudly called me dead weight in front of everyone. I deliberately ignored every single notification that flashed across my screen. At exactly 45 minutes past 8 the following morning, I confidently walked through the towering, immaculate glass doors of the highly intimidating Vanguard Holdings corporate building. The massive, expansive lobby was incredibly quiet, smelling distinctly of polished marble stone and expensive air filtration. When I quietly told the impeccably dressed receptionist my name and explicitly stated that I had a scheduled appointment with Elias Croft, she instantly sat up incredibly straight, her entire demeanor changing to one of utmost respect. She quickly pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward a highly polished private elevator bank in the corner. "The 17th floor," she said in a hushed, reverent tone. "Mr. Croft is eagerly expecting your arrival." When the silent elevator doors finally slid open, I was immediately guided down a profoundly quiet, deeply carpeted hallway lined entirely with dark, expensive mahogany wood. Elias Croft, a remarkably sharp 61-year-old self-made billionaire, was sitting calmly behind a truly massive solid oak desk. He did not bother to shake my hand with false pleasantries. He did not waste time offering me useless coffee. Instead, he simply reached into a deep, locked drawer and deliberately dropped a thick, incredibly weathered manila folder onto the center of the desk between us. I slowly opened the heavy folder. Inside were my own original, highly detailed handwritten architectural diagrams, complex routing mathematics, and foundational data flowcharts from several years ago. There was even a distinct brown circular ring on one specific page from a carelessly placed coffee cup during a brutally exhausting all-night coding shift. I vividly remembered from 5 years ago. Zenith Logistics profoundly watered this brilliant work down, Elias stated firmly, leaning aggressively forward over the desk. They foolishly turned your highly advanced mathematics into a remarkably cheap, simplified marketing slide just to show foolish investors, but the absolute core logic remains incredibly brilliant. This entire intellectual property is legally yours, Julian. I stared intently at the old coffee-stained paper, my mind racing. "How on earth did you manage to get these highly confidential documents?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I aggressively buy up distressed tech assets and severely undervalued high-value intellectual property," Elias replied coolly. "I absolutely know when someone is unknowingly sitting on a massive gold mine that their incompetent management simply does not understand. I intensely want you to completely rebuild this entire system from absolute scratch, exactly the pure, uncompromised way you always wanted to build it before they ruthlessly cut your development budget. You will have absolute, total autonomy, and it will be fully, unconditionally funded." I looked up slowly, meeting his intense gaze. "What exactly is the inevitable catch?" I asked cautiously. "You must go completely dark," Elias said, his voice dropping slightly. "Absolutely no social media presence, absolutely no public code repositories, and no networking events. We will quietly set up an entirely anonymous dummy corporation called Obsidian Systems. On all official legal paper, you simply do not exist. My firm will aggressively fund the anonymous entity completely quietly. We absolutely do not announce anything publicly until the entire system is perfectly ready to deploy. Can you truly live completely in the shadows for a long while? I looked back down at the intricate diagrams of the powerful routing engine. It was absolutely everything I had ever dreamed of building. I will carefully need 2 full days to gather my people, I said steadily. You have exactly 60 short seconds to decide, Elias replied coldly, deliberately checking his expensive watch. I decisively reached for the heavy silver pen on his desk. I will absolutely do it. We quietly operated out of a remarkably dusty, highly inconspicuous third-floor office space located directly above a noisy dental clinic in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The large glass windows were heavily blacked out with thick plastic sheets, and the stagnant air constantly smelled of stale, cheap coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Elias Croft had quickly wired the substantial initial funding to our heavily encrypted anonymous account, but we absolutely did not spend a single dime on high-end office furniture or sleek corporate decorations. We deliberately spent every available resource entirely on immense raw computing power, hardwired private servers, and absolute top-tier network security. I quickly brought Clara Jensen in first. She had brilliantly co-designed the core logical routing engine alongside me, back when we both still naively believed Zenith Logistics actually valued true engineering excellence. They had ruthlessly laid her off during a chaotic corporate restructuring several months before my own public firing. When I securely called her, she did not even bother to ask about the proposed salary or the benefits package. She simply asked if I still possessed the original mathematical diagrams. Even better, I told her quietly over the encrypted line. I finally have the complete unrestricted funding to build it perfectly right. She immediately quit her temporary contract job that very afternoon and enthusiastically showed up at the hidden suburban office at exactly 7 in the morning the very next day. She immediately set up her massive dual monitors and began enthusiastically sketching the complex database relationships on a small scuffed whiteboard. Jared Vance came next. Jared was a remarkably brilliant quality assurance engineer who was absolutely ruthless and uncompromising with his code reviews. He had angrily left Zenith Logistics after an incredibly arrogant junior product manager foolishly told him that comprehensive automated testing was absolutely not a value-generating position for the company. When I carefully reached out to him, his laugh was incredibly short, sharp, and filled with bitter vindication. I want completely in, Jared said firmly. What specific alias name should I use on all my code commits? We are absolutely not using our real legal names under any circumstances, I told him seriously. We are operating completely as ghosts. For the next several incredibly long, exhausting months, we essentially worked entirely like invisible ghosts. We absolutely did not use our personal laptops or home networks under any circumstances. We strictly only used completely clean, isolated machines that never directly connected to the open, public internet without first passing securely through 3 heavy layers of deeply encrypted proxies. There was absolutely no corporate chat software, no video conferencing tools, and absolutely no shared public cloud storage. We strictly used a highly secure open-source peer-to-peer encrypted chat tool running exclusively on a tightly controlled local network. Every single code commit was meticulously signed with an anonymous alias. Every single operational system log was automatically and permanently wiped at exactly midnight. Every Friday night, I carefully printed the highly sensitive core repository updates on physical paper, locked them securely in a massive heavy steel drawer, and turned a heavy physical brass key. We worked in intense, unbroken silence, driven powerfully by a deeply quiet, burning intensity. Sometimes we would easily go 4 continuous hours without a single person saying a single word out loud. The only audible sound in the room being the rapid, rhythmic tapping of mechanical keyboards and the constant steady hum of the massive cooling fans keeping our servers from melting down. We quietly ate cheap, greasy takeout food directly at our messy desks, frequently sharing bitter, validating stories about the profoundly ridiculous, incompetent management decisions constantly made at our former company. It was an incredibly powerful bonding experience, built firmly on deeply shared betrayal and immense mutual respect. The physical toll of the grueling work was undeniably real. I was 49 years old, and constantly sleeping awkwardly on a cheap cot in a stuffy windowless room was absolutely not easy on my aching back. But every single time I proudly saw the incredibly complex routing engine successfully run us a simulation, all the physical pain instantly vanished. At Zenith Logistics, their bloated, poorly optimized system inevitably took many long minutes to poorly calculate a basic full cross-state fleet optimization. If a sudden, unexpected winter storm viciously hit the Midwestern highways, their panicked dispatchers had to desperately and manually override the broken routes, causing massive cascading hours of expensive delays. Our brilliant new platform, which we securely named Obsidian Lock, accomplished the exact same massive calculation in a fraction of a single minute. It absolutely did not just clumsily react to delays after they happened. It brilliantly predicted them well in advance by constantly analyzing massive streams of live, complex weather data and highly detailed highway sensor APIs. Every single time an impossibly difficult test suite flawlessly passed, Jared would slowly look up from his glowing screens, nod exactly once in silent approval, and immediately return to furiously typing on his mechanical keyboard. Clara sat quietly in the far corner, her fingers absolutely flying in a blur across the keys as she continuously refined the incredibly complex, multi-state database schemas. We were rapidly rebuilding my entire life's work, but this incredibly satisfying time, there were absolutely no incompetent corporate managers constantly breathing down our tired necks, loudly demanding that we recklessly cut critical corners just to meet arbitrary, meaningless quarterly sales presentations. Every few weeks, the billionaire Elias Croft would securely call my encrypted burner phone. The highly secure calls absolutely never lasted more than a few incredibly brief minutes. He absolutely never bothered to ask about my personal feelings or team morale. He strictly only demanded the hard, verifiable performance metrics. The critical system latency is consistently down to a remarkably low number of milliseconds, I confidently told him during one particularly late call. Excellent, Elias replied, his deep voice incredibly flat and emotionless. But you must absolutely stay completely invisible. Do not ever get foolishly greedy for public attention. The very first time Zenith Logistics ever hears about our existence, it absolutely must be far too late for them to successfully react. We are carefully building a highly lethal, fully loaded weapon, Julian. You absolutely do not ever show the target the weapon before you inevitably pull the trigger. He was absolutely, completely right. We were absolutely not looking for flashy tech blog articles or arrogant public funding announcements. We were meticulously building a profoundly disruptive system deliberately designed to utterly and completely displace them entirely from the lucrative market. I frequently spent my quiet nights sitting silently in the dark corner of the room, obsessively watching the bright green lines of complex data smoothly move across the massive glowing monitors. The highly realistic simulation accurately showed hundreds of virtual freight trucks successfully navigating a massive, catastrophic blizzard in the Midwest. While the broken Zenith logistics system would have completely frozen them dangerously in place, our brilliant Obsidian Lock system intelligently rerouted them seamlessly through completely clear, obscure local lanes, saving a massive percentage in expensive fuel costs and flawlessly keeping the highly sensitive cargo at exactly the perfect sub-zero temperature. It was breathtakingly beautiful. It was incredibly clean, devastatingly fast, and deadly efficient, and it belonged entirely, legally, and unquestionably to us. I would calmly look at the glowing screen, slowly run my hand over the deeply scarred wood of the cheap desk, and profoundly feel a deeply immense sense of pure, absolute calm. The deeply humiliating public firing at the expensive steakhouse finally felt a million miles away now. Gavin Thorne foolishly thought he had victoriously thrown away dead weight. In absolute reality, he had just arrogantly cut the vital, essential anchor that was barely keeping his rapidly sinking corporate ship safely afloat. The trap was perfectly set, and all we had to do was patiently wait for them to blindly walk right into it. At exactly 2:15 in the morning on a freezing Tuesday, my encrypted burner phone violently buzzed twice in the dark. It was a highly secure, heavily encrypted text message from Clara. "Are you currently awake?" You need to deeply check the regional transport data lines right this second. I immediately sat up in my cot, hastily throwing off the heavy blanket, and practically sprinted to my workstation. A mid-tier, incredibly reliable freight carrier based in the heart of the region had been a profoundly loyal client of Zenith Logistics for over 6 long years. They were absolutely not massive enough to draw major industry headlines, but they were a highly solid, respectable old-school fleet with hundreds of active trucks. I rapidly booted up my secure machine and expertly ran a highly complex diagnostic trace directly on the regional data transmission lines. The raw, verifiable numbers absolutely did not lie. The carrier had quietly, seamlessly switched their primary operational routing platform just a few short days ago. There was absolutely no flashy public announcement, and their public-facing web portal deliberately did not list any new vendor. But when I carefully analyzed their complex load optimization data fingerprints, I immediately saw our undeniable, brilliant work. It was the profoundly distinct, undeniable digital signature of Obsidian Lock. The incredibly complex routes were flawlessly recalculating at a breathtaking speed, the historical error margins were practically non-existent, and our highly proprietary thermal anomaly detection tags were fully active and functioning perfectly. I quickly sent a secure ping to our encrypted team chat channel. Clara rapidly responded within a few short minutes, enthusiastically confirming that the highly complex database pathing was undeniably ours. Jared eagerly added, "They are absolutely not even trying to mask the data transfer. The new system is seamlessly moving their entire massive fleet perfectly." We had successfully executed a completely flawless soft entry into the highly competitive market. We deliberately did not run expensive, flashy advertising campaigns. We just quietly, ruthlessly took over the absolute worst, most difficult freight lanes in several major states. The verifiable financial results were incredibly immediate and remarkably stable. Exhausted drivers in obscure online trucking forums rapidly began enthusiastically whispering about a mysterious, flawless ghost platform that miraculously kept them safely moving, even when catastrophic winter storms completely shut down the major interstate highways. Meanwhile, back at the rapidly crumbling headquarters of Zenith Logistics, the heavy wheels were catastrophically falling off the corporate wagon. Gavin Thorne had arrogantly tried to hastily upgrade their ancient, fragile system, but because he had foolishly discarded my entire original expert architecture team, his newly hired, inexperienced developers fundamentally did not understand how the deeply complex databases actually connected. They had recklessly stripped out vital, essential safety optimization features just to desperately save on rising server hosting costs. As a direct, disastrous result, their critical software APIs rapidly began breaking completely. Their essential tracking systems frequently lagged by several dangerous hours, and their primary customer portal rapidly began crashing completely on a daily basis. The profound, inescapable panic was rapidly starting to clearly show across their entire operation. They suffered a truly massive, catastrophic breakdown with their highly sensitive temperature-controlled freight lanes, causing an astronomical financial amount of highly sensitive perishable products to completely spoil because the broken system utterly failed to alert the desperate dispatchers when the critical cooling units unexpectedly shut down. The massive, furious agricultural company immediately threatened to legally sue them into oblivion, and the hungry local news agencies quickly picked up the embarrassing story, prominently highlighting the massive, shameful waste. Frustrated drivers were aggressively venting their immense anger on highly public online forums, constantly posting damning screenshots of completely frozen screens and absurd routing loops that foolishly sent them driving in endless, wasteful circles. Their desperate customer service lines were catastrophically backed up, with hundreds of completely unresolved angry tickets, and their deeply stressed dispatchers were frequently calling in sick, just to cowardly avoid answering the incredibly angry phone calls from furious, bleeding clients. On a chaotic Thursday afternoon, Jared securely sent me a highly damning leaked screen recording of an incredibly tense internal Zenith Logistics all-hands video conference call. In the remarkably chaotic video, Gavin Thorne was aggressively standing in front of a massive white board, his normally composed face bright red with uncontrollable rage, frantically waving a black dry erase marker. "This is absolutely not a fundamental system failure," Gavin yelled desperately, his booming voice noticeably cracking with intense panic. "It is merely a minor temporary miscommunication. The ancient legacy code was incredibly poorly documented by the incompetent developers who thankfully left us recently. Some foolish, unauthorized junior interns recklessly made terrible changes to the core routing logic without proper management oversight. We are absolutely fixing it right now," Gavin was pathetically, desperately blaming innocent young interns for his own profound, catastrophic technical incompetence. Clara quietly leaned over my tired shoulder to carefully watch the disastrous video. She laughed, a deeply quiet, incredibly cold sound that echoed in the dusty room. "He actually still foolishly thinks this is just a minor fixable bug," she said with intense satisfaction. "He absolutely has no earthly idea that we are already flawlessly running massive circles completely around them in the brutal real world." I did not bother to smile. "Not quite yet," I said quietly, my voice hard. "We still need to keep our heads completely down and let them confidently destroy themselves." I slowly sat back in my uncomfortable chair, staring intensely at the glowing data screens. The painful memory of Gavin Thorne arrogantly raising his crystal glass at the expensive steakhouse briefly flashed vividly through my mind, but it absolutely did not make me feel angry anymore. It strictly only made me focus intensely on the flawless code. That remarkably quiet night, my encrypted phone unexpectedly rang again. It was Elias Croft. The quiet, soft entry worked flawlessly, Elias stated calmly. "Our highly secure virtual server loads are running perfectly clean. Are you entirely ready for when things inevitably get incredibly loud?" I slowly took a deep, steadying breath. "Yes," I answered firmly. "We are completely ready." He immediately hung up the secure line without saying another word. By the end of the incredibly tense week, the flawless live data reports definitively showed that Obsidian Lock was massively outperforming Zenith Logistics by a staggering margin across absolutely all critical industry benchmarks. The silence from Zenith was truly deafening, but I profoundly knew it would not last long. They were heavily bleeding major clients, and eventually, they would frantically trace the massive data flow directly back to us. The highly aggressive, profoundly threatening cease and desist legal letter finally arrived directly at my hidden desk on a remarkably quiet Thursday morning via certified legal mail. It was an incredibly heavy, thick white envelope with the massive Zenith Logistics corporate logo proudly printed in bold, intimidating silver lettering at the very top. The dense letter was an incredibly long, highly detailed legal document written in deeply aggressive, extremely dense legalese, practically overflowing with severe, intimidating threats of catastrophic legal action. They aggressively accused us of massive intellectual property theft, severe misappropriation of highly valuable corporate trade secrets, and deliberate, malicious, systemic sabotage of their business operations. They angrily demanded that our anonymous corporation immediately cease all business operations, permanently shut down our massive servers, and completely hand over our entire proprietary codebase within an impossibly short legal deadline. I absolutely did not panic. I did not angrily throw things around the office. I simply and calmly folded the heavy legal letter, carefully placed it securely in my worn leather briefcase, and immediately drove directly to the towering Vanguard Holdings corporate offices to urgently meet with Elias Croft and his elite legal team. When I calmly arrived, Elias was already patiently waiting in a highly secure, private glass conference room alongside Diana, a fiercely intelligent, remarkably sharp corporate attorney who deeply specialized in high-stakes, immensely complex technology legal disputes. Diana was a remarkably quiet, intensely focused professional with cold, calculating steel-gray eyes. She absolutely did not waste a single second with meaningless pleasantries. She aggressively pulled the threatening letter directly from my hands, laid it perfectly flat on the heavy wooden table, and began rapidly scanning the dense legal paragraphs with predatory focus. "They are absolutely bluffing out of sheer desperation," Diana confidently stated after a few short minutes, a remarkably cold, deeply predatory smile slowly appearing on her face. They are catastrophically bleeding massive clients, and they are profoundly desperate. They foolishly want to aggressively scare you into freely giving them the flawless code because they are utterly, completely incapable of building it themselves. For the next several intense hours, we meticulously constructed a truly devastating, incredibly comprehensive legal counterstrike. I carefully pulled up my deeply encrypted, highly secure external hard drive, thoroughly showing Diana my original, meticulously detailed development logs from years ago. We painstakingly went through the old, coffee-stained paper architecture diagrams, my meticulously preserved, completely verified chat export logs, and the highly detailed, undeniably time-stamped local code commit histories that conclusively predated my public, humiliating firing by several long years. Under strict federal law, specifically the incredibly powerful 17 United States Code, Section 106, the absolute exclusive legal rights to a copyrighted intellectual work permanently remain with the original creator, unless there is a highly explicit, formally executed written agreement legally transferring those specific rights, Diana explained with absolute, unwavering certainty. Your original highly standard employment contract with Zenith Logistics had a highly specific, explicitly clear legal clause strictly stating that any completely distinct intellectual property thoroughly developed entirely outside of official, sanctioned project scopes absolutely remained your exclusive personal property unless they formally and legally executed a massive financial buyout. They absolutely, definitively never did that. They simply arrogantly took your remarkably brilliant raw prototype, lazily wrapped a remarkably cheap graphical interface around it, and fraudulently called it their own proprietary creation. This is a remarkably clear, overwhelmingly undeniable case of severe fraudulent attribution, and by foolishly accusing you of theft in a formal legal document, they are incredibly recklessly exposing themselves to utterly massive, catastrophic legal liabilities. Furthermore, by knowingly and deliberately falsifying critical temperature logs on highly sensitive cold chain cargo to maliciously hide their massive system failures, they are actively committing severe insurance fraud. Once revealed, the massive insurance companies will instantly and aggressively deny their coverage, leaving them personally and criminally liable for an astronomical amount of utterly spoiled goods. By the early morning, Diana had flawlessly drafted a massive, overwhelming legal response. It was absolutely not a desperate plea for mercy. It was an absolute devastating legal hammer. It prominently contained incredibly high resolution, perfectly clear scans of my original architectural diagrams, complete with undeniable dates, irrefutable timestamps, and the original coffee stains. It included damning, verified screenshots of Gavin Thorne explicitly telling me in a formal corporate email that my complex routing system was merely a useless personal project that Zenith Logistics would absolutely never officially fund. We absolutely did not just quietly send the devastating response to their cowardly legal department. We immediately and aggressively filed a massive, formal legal counter-complaint in the highest federal court, aggressively accusing the entire Zenith Logistics Executive Board of severe fraudulent attribution, absolute breach of fiduciary duty, and the completely illegal, unauthorized use of my private personal property. We demand severe, catastrophic punitive damages, Diana said coldly. 2 extremely short days later, a highly prominent, incredibly influential investigative tech journalist unexpectedly published a massive, truly devastating exposé. The massive headline read, "How Zenith Logistics Arrogantly Erased the Brilliant Architect Behind Their Entire Failing Network." The incredibly detailed article went massively viral within mere hours. It prominently included undeniable screenshots of the highly arrogant emails Gavin Thorne had sent me, the exact timeline of my deeply humiliating public firing at the steakhouse, and the undeniable original diagrams conclusively proving I entirely owned the core mathematical logic. By the early afternoon, the Zenith Logistics corporate stock price had catastrophically plummeted by a staggering, unbelievable amount, instantly wiping out a colossal amount of market value. Major, furious institutional investors rapidly began demanding immediate, brutal explanations, and several cowardly board members quickly resigned in absolute disgrace before the financial market even closed. Gavin Thorne was completely forced to cowardly issue a remarkably dry, incredibly defensive public statement pathetically claiming that the company was hastily launching an internal review. But the catastrophic, irreversible damage was completely done. The fragile corporate facade had completely cracked, and the entire lucrative industry could finally clearly see the undeniable truth. By the evening, several massive insurance companies had already aggressively contacted Diana, formally requesting absolute access to our flawless data logs to deeply investigate the severely falsified cold chain reports. We had absolutely not fired a single angry shot in public, but the heavy walls were rapidly closing in on the incredibly arrogant people who had foolishly called me dead weight. The absolute collapse of Zenith Logistics happened profoundly faster than anyone ever expected. The largest shipper in the country loudly announced they were completely terminating their massive contract, immediately citing a complete, catastrophic failure of data integrity. The very next day, they quietly signed a massive, long-term legal contract directly with us. The deeply furious board of directors took immediate, brutal action. Gavin Thorne was officially and unceremoniously terminated from his powerful position. He was aggressively escorted directly out of the towering building by armed security guards, receiving absolutely no financial severance pay and facing a truly massive, career-ending shareholder lawsuit patiently waiting for him. Elias Croft absolutely did not buy the failing company, but he aggressively bought their remaining physical transport assets at a truly massive, insulting discount. He then officially and proudly revealed our company to the public. The massive launch day was proudly held in a stunning high-floor glass conference room. There was no flashy music. It was a serious gathering of the most powerful industry leaders. I proudly stood near the back, wearing a perfectly tailored suit. Elias briefly took the massive stage, showing the absolute, undeniable superiority of our flawless system. He then respectfully motioned toward me. "We did not build this with marketing," Elias loudly announced. "Meet the absolute architect, Julian Brooks." I confidently walked up to the microphone. The massive room was perfectly quiet. I calmly looked out at the powerful faces of the investors and executives. I vividly thought about that deeply humiliating steakhouse. "They arrogantly told me I was dead weight," I said, my steady voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. I did not waste my valuable time blindly arguing with their foolishness. I simply built the absolute flawless system they swore could never be built. The unchangeable data always wins. There was a deeply respectful, profound silence, followed by polite, firm nodding from the powerful executives. I proudly stepped back and walked calmly off the stage. 4 blocks away, sitting desperately in a cramped, dark public space, Gavin Thorne was helplessly watching the live stream. He saw my proud face. He saw the real-time stock ticker showing his former company trading at absolute zero. He had arrogantly tried to maliciously steal my entire legacy, and in the devastating process, he had completely, utterly destroyed his own. I calmly returned to our massive new development facility the very next day. The team was already hard at work on the flawless code. I sat quietly in my massive corner office, peacefully watching the beautiful green routing lines flawlessly move across the massive digital dashboard. The deeply heavy weight of the betrayal was finally completely gone. Now there was only the beautiful, clean code, the absolute truth, and my proudly restored name properly etched exactly where it rightfully belonged. The profound aftermath of the entire devastating corporate collapse completely reshaped the entire logistical landscape for many long years to come. Every single major industry publication aggressively wrote massive, sprawling, highly detailed articles endlessly analyzing our flawless legal counterstrike and our brilliant architectural design. Gavin Thorne eventually moved far away, completely abandoning the high-stakes tech sector in total, absolute disgrace, entirely unable to ever secure another significant managerial role. Meanwhile, the incredibly brilliant engineers who had bravely chosen to faithfully join our anonymous, risky venture were massively rewarded with immense wealth and total creative freedom. The incredibly quiet, dusty room above the noisy suburban dental office was proudly preserved in my memories as the sacred birthplace of our ultimate victory. The unyielding, absolute power of pure mathematics, ironclad copyright protection, and unwavering personal resilience had entirely triumphed over hollow corporate greed. We had definitively proven that true genius simply cannot be aggressively erased or lazily stolen. The undeniable truth is that the fundamental core of any massive successful enterprise is never the loud executives in tight suits, but the quiet, relentless builders typing perfectly clean code in the dark.